been a mill here for a long time, but the thing that's really quite distinctive about Little Cressingham Mill is the fact that it's a combined wind and water mill on the same site. It's very unusual. My name's Peter Goulding. In 2010 I was trained by a Heritage Lottery funded project run by the Broads Authority to be a millwright. Since then I've been working on heritage buildings and windmills. Before we had sort of real access to coal and hydrocarbons, water and wind are absolutely essential for running big machinery. The largest sort of day-to-day uses for that kind of power is to grind corn. Right through from the maybe 11th, 12th centuries, windmills, and long before that water mills, were used to grind corn, absolutely essential for the agricultural economy across nearly 1,000 years.
The Breckland Society is one of the lead partners in the National Lottery Heritage Fund's Brecks, Fen, Edge and Rivers Landscape Partnership Scheme, which is a multi-million-pound scheme designed to raise awareness of the heritage of the waterways in the Brecks. I'm James Parry, I'm chairman of the Breckland Society, and we are running a project called Industrious Rivers, which looks at the industrial archaeology of the waterways in the area. The Breckland Society was set up in 2003. We're a volunteer-led membership organisation, and the point of the society is to raise awareness of the really important heritage of the Brecks, which cover 370 square miles of inland Norfolk and Suffolk. So it's a huge area with a very distinctive landscape and a rather unique set of attributes in terms of its waterways. The volunteers have been researching all aspects of the rivers of the Brecks through history. So that covers the economic activities that used to take place along the rivers. Nowadays we largely regard these rivers as being recreational places and not really having any economic interest or viability, but historically that was not the case at all. They were very busy arteries for commerce and trade, and even relatively small rivers were important because they would have had water mills which grind corn, and so they contributed to the local economy.
This is a historic site. Back in the Domesday Survey there were 2 water mills listed in Little Cressingham, and it's believed that this is the site of one of those water mills. I'm Amanda Ricks, I'm Norfolk County Council's advisor to the Norfolk Windmills Trust.
Isn't much you doing to the mill at the moment, Amanda?
There's a lot of maintenance needs doing, isn't there? Look at that ivy growing up there.
I've seen it, I think.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. That brickwork's getting a bit wrecked by that tree as well, isn't it?
Yeah, we need to cut that out again.
Mechanically, what the mill has to do is take either the wind or the water power and transfer it into the power needed to turn the stones and grind the corn.
The windmill side of the operation, you would have a cap on the top of the mill, which was timber, and then on the back of the cap you'd have what's known as a fantail, which had angled blades to catch the changes in the wind direction, and then via a series of cogs that would turn the cap to face into the wind. The sails would turn. That would be connected to a long shaft known as a wind shaft, and then via another series of cogs that would come down through the mill. Off from that you had what was known as a great spur wheel, and that would power your stones. And then the watermill side of the operation, you've got the mill lake, the mill pond, that would bring the water to the mill. It was a spur off the main river. By opening the sluice gates, you would get the water wheel to turn.
The whole mill has to turn the power coming in into rotary motion. And how it does this is a water wheel will have a shaft going through it, and that shaft will be connected to a cog. From there, all the power is taken off by other cogs to start running to the millstones, which are like very, very heavy pieces of kit, but they will run at perhaps up to 40, 60 revolutions a minute. So it's like very substantial power. And a windmill does the same thing. It takes the power from the sails, sends it down the big main shaft that goes right down the centre of the mill, and that's connected by cogs to the mechanisms that drive the millstones. There's so much power, there's so much torque in these things, especially when you get a good head of water or a good blow of wind, that it's quite easily as well to take off more power from other shafts, unused line drives and stuff like that. So it's very usual to have auxiliary machines that perhaps dress flour or whatever machinery they want to do.
Historically, they would have been really busy hubs in the landscape, and farmers would have been bringing their corn here to be to be ground, and there would have been a sense of community around these buildings.
So I think one of the sort of shames about old buildings like this is that like they had people really intimately connected with their whole working lives, all of the individuals who played some part in the building's history. But once the like reason for the building's work is like over, that really disappears and no one's really involved in the building anymore.
And so what our volunteers have been trying to do is pull together a portrait of what this actually meant, how it was. And we know that there were all sorts of interesting stories. I mean, millers and mill owners were quite influential people in local society because they held a sort of role as an economic hub, really.
The miller would have been part of like village life, really, but it wasn't always necessarily a particularly easy relationship. Being a miller was often a byword for like being a bit of a cheat and a bit venal, to be honest, which was probably went with the relationship that a lot of the local farmers or villagers would have had with them, trying to like get the best price for what they brought to him and to buy flour at a reasonable price. So you do get a lot of tension in historical records across sort of East Anglia between the miller and the rest of the village.
Our researchers are turning up all sorts of interesting stories. One of the tales they discovered was of a fairly modest servant girl who took a miller to court. Now, this is really quite unusual because millers were influential people in local society, but the miller had got her pregnant and basically abandoned her, and she had no means of support or livelihood. So she actually went public with it, which was quite a thing really in the early 19th century. And it turns out she was successful, and the miller was forced to give her some money towards the care and upkeep of her child. So that was an interesting story to come up. We are going to be producing an illustrated report of our findings and also a digital map of the surviving industrial structures along the rivers.
And I think it's really important for the conservation of such places is to involve people and to involve the community. So when we had the Industrious Rivers project, we did have the training day where the volunteers came in, learnt a few things about the conservation and had a good look around the building. I think it's really important to get people involved to breathe life into the buildings again.
We visit some of the river sites today, some of the mill sites, which are largely actually now just like piles of bricks under vegetation. Some of them have been converted into residential use.
So many mills have just absolutely disappeared. What they will survive is place names like and road names like Windmill Road or Mill Lane, very common street names in like nearly any village across the counties.
Some, like Little Cressingham Mill, are actually being maintained, and there's some degree of public access through open days.
Light touch conservation is far better because you're preserving the historical significance of the mill and the features that could be lost by heavy restoration or conversion to any other use.
The other thing I think that has really struck us is how so much of the industrial legacy of these mills was lost fairly recently. We know of one case where an old water mill, where the actual wheel was discarded and in the river still just a few years ago, and then was then cleared away by the landowner. So, we're tantalisingly close, but we're documenting as much as we can, and we'll be making this public on our website, and hope that it will just raise awareness of how important these mills were, and how the rivers were once really, really busy arteries, and not the gentle, winding pastoral scenes that we're more familiar with as we go out on an evening stroll in the summer.